Hello, so set 15 just launched earlier today, and what I want to do is go over a couple comps that I think are pretty good for climbing and some of my best recommendations for some reroll as well as non-reroll comps to play. These aren't necessarily going to be all of the strongest comps according to stats or anything like that, but this is going to be some comps that I think are relatively consistent and easy to play for a variety of reasons, and intertwined in those will also be some high cap or situational comps. We're going to go through 3 and 3 as I normally do at the start of every set and at the start of every patch. If you like my content, please make sure to like and subscribe because it does help me out as a smaller TFT content creator. We're going to be starting by doing guides on set 15 where I have lots of stuff to go through like Orn artifacts and items and all the stuff that you know me for from previous sets. If you're a returning viewer, I'm going to be doing all of that for set 15 again, and improve as much as I can from what I've done in the past. Additionally, I made a post. I'm going to be uploading daily VODs of gameplay. Many people have been asking for gameplay because they don't necessarily want the guides, but they want to see somebody like playing through all of the stages. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to upload stream highlights or games from stream on a separate channel. I'll link it as well. I'm going to start doing this later tonight. So every single day there will be daily Friend Robot Gaming VODs from my live streams, so expect them to be like full of bitching and complaining and moaning, but also have the same like kind of me talking to chat and trying to explain my thought process along the way. If you're a fan of gameplay, there'll be a separate gameplay channel that I'm starting today. Now let's go through the comps. So number one, so we're going to start with 3 non-reroll comps because I think that's usually like the default gameplay. If you don't have a good spot for a reroll, you have to look for like a level 8 style of comp. These are going to be ones that, like I said, it's the first day of the patch. We can't really look and trust like, stats and stuff like that just yet. Not everything is fully flushed out. A lot of this is coming from prior knowledge in PBE. So if things change, don't worry. I'm going to be doing an updated version of this guide next week as well. So if things change, if something comes out that it's broken, if something comes out that it's super weak, we're going to fix everything, items, all of that once we have a little bit more information while the set becomes like a little bit more mature. But anyways, one of the easiest comps to play, and it has been this way for a while, is Star Guardian. It did recently get nerfed, so don't worry, it's not super broken or anything like that, but it is relatively consistent and alright to play. The idea is that you basically just play all of the Star Guardians. Star Guardians get stacking abilities. Basically, like the more Star Guardians you play, you get these extra bonuses. And these bonuses are really strong in a variety of different scenarios, which we'll talk about some of the synergies after. When you're playing around this comp, the main 2 carries that you're trying to play around are Ahri and Jinx. What makes this comp super consistent is that Ahri 2 is a demon. You don't even have to reroll Ahri. You could, if you want, go for like an Ahri 3, but even an Ahri 2 is going to be an absolute unit that is going to help you basically win out or have a really good time on your level 8 roll down. It's really easy to hit because she's a 3 cost, so it's really good stabilization point because of all the bonus with Star Guardian. She absolutely hits like a truck. And then also what you want is damage via Jinx. Jinx has Sniper as a trait. You don't have to worry too much about it because with the Star Guardian she performs well as of herself. So these are going to be your main units. Something else that helps out a lot is that Nico 2 is also a pretty good tank in this setup. So between Ahri and Nico, that's why this is pretty consistent. You can stabilize pretty well. Seraphine, we'll talk about in a second. But basically with Ahri, I don't even know if you need mana generation. I just kind of put blue buff here. But the main thing that you usually like to go for is crit. She has really good damage, and scaling that AP up because she's a Sork and has all the bonuses from Star Guarding, scaling that up with some crit and damage amp via Jewel Gauntlet for the ult critting and Striker's Flail to get like that extra damage amp on those critical strikes and give you critical strike chance. Those 2 together, she can hit like a truck. A lot of times I'll just prioritize these 2 items and then some sort of mana item or some sort of tier based item. If you don't know, all items now that are made with a tier give some sort of mana generation. It's a new stat instead of starting mana. So even something like a Void Staff that gives a lot of good stats, attack speed, ability power, it also gives a little bit of mana regen. So something like this type of build could actually work really well on Ahri, that you don't necessarily need like the 3rd item to be a mana item, but even like a Shojin will work out great. A blue buff could also work out great. Last item, pretty flexible, but you want something that's tier based in my opinion, just to help the Ahri get some of those casts off to do a bunch of damage. Next we have Jinx. Jinx is an AD unit. She has a passive that gives her a bunch of attack speed, so you don't really need to worry about giving this Jinx extra attack speed. Much of her damage, however, is tied to her ult, which is basically like a giant nuke. She does like the whole thing. She shoots the rocket, right? The whole Jinx thing. So a lot of times what will help out, because she has so much attack speed, Shojin. Shojin, you basically get a bunch of extra mana, can get those ults off a little bit faster. Shojin, and then similar to Ari, I'm just putting a full crit build here. Just make use of all the stats that you're getting. Infinity Edge, make your ult crit. Strikers give you critical strike chance, and then give you some extra damage amp to top it all off. In terms of units, Seraphine, you could move Ari items onto Seraphine once you have a Seraphine 2 as a high cap version. Seraphine and Ari pretty much, unfortunately, do around the same amount of damage. So you don't have to switch items onto Seraphine. You could just throw all your junk onto Seraphine because Seraphine scales with all of the stats. You can just take all your junk items and put them on Seraphine and you'll be fine. But if you really want to, Seraphine does have like a nuke effect where she can like hit a backline unit and kill them pretty easily. So if there's like a unit that has like, you know, for example, if you're playing like a board that has a lot of frontline and you want to try and snipe the backline, Seraphine could then be better. So it's really situational on who you itemize, but I would work on Seraphine items after, and I think that a lot of times you're okay with just leaving items on Ari. Up to you. It's just that Seraphine, the way that she does the damage, she just takes way too much time to cast, so she has a huge mana threshold. She's got to be a little bit careful around that. With your team, you get Prodigy and Sork in. You get Prodigy in for free. And what I would recommend is just playing a Swain if you're just looking for an easy one in, just to give you Sork and Bastion. Sork isn't super important on the Ari. It does help out quite a bit. You could swap him out for some high cap units like a Braum later in the game. But typically you're just going to play all the Star Guardians. You get Prodigy in for free to help your Seraphine and the rest of your board. And then usually you're playing some frontline trait. And if you end up making it to like a super high level, you can then build towards some of these other frontline synergies, right? Protectors if you have a high Nico, or heavyweight as well that can help out there. But a lot of times just Swain ties it together in a nice way. This board also works really well from Crystal Gambit. So if you're playing Crystal Gambit, you can pivot into this board pretty nicely because you keep 2 of the Crystal Gambit units. So it's not that difficult of a pivot to say. Next, if we're going through a comp that is another easy to play, pretty consistent comp, Soul Fighter is one of those comps. Soul Fighter is basically similar to like some of the other traits we've seen, like what was it last set? It was Street Demon, right? It gives you money rounded stats. Basically, after a certain amount of time, or basically once you stack about a bunch of damage, you get extra damage amp, but before then you're basically stacking ability power and AP, and then Soul Fighter you also get a bunch of HP. So it gives you tank stats, it gives you AP, and it gives you AD. And then eventually it gives you true damage. So it gives you a lot of damage and it gives you a decent amount of tankiness. Because of that, it becomes relatively consistent if you just play Vertical Soul Fighter. You have a board that is relatively hard to chew through because you have a lot of HP on those tank units. But then you also get a lot of damage, especially the true damage, which can pretty much almost like it's bypassing armor MR. It does an insane amount of damage. A lot of this is tied towards Gwen, however. Gwen is the 8th Soul Fighter and she is a 5 cost. She got nerfed a little bit, but she's still plenty strong. She's not like as obnoxious as she was in PBE if you played the beta, but basically with Gwen, that's what you're looking for when you're playing Soul Fighter. Until you hit Gwen, there's a couple other options we'll talk about in a second, but you can't really like just like full on just say I'm playing Gwen, because you got to stabilize around your 4 cost units. So then what you're really going to be looking for is Set and Samira. Samira is going to be usually your stabilization point, so a lot of times I would recommend prioritizing Samira items and then worrying about the Gwen items later in the game, just because like if you do it backwards, you won't be super stable on your level 8, especially if things go wrong. So with Samira has a really interesting effect, but basically she casts 4 times and then she does like a giga cast. Every time she casts, she gets a style point. That's like her little D to C to, like, you know, her Devil May Cry ripoff thing, where she goes up to S. But basically she gets stacking Omnivamp, which is nice. Because it allows her to survive pretty well. Then she does a bunch of damage, and then eventually she does like her whole spinning thing once she casts 4 times. At that point, she's gonna dive into enemy lines, so it helps that she has a bunch of damage amp, and then after, it helps that she has a bunch of Omnivamp, and then after it'll reset her style to 0. Because she gets a lot of AD from Soul Fighter, something that works really nice in my opinion is just crit. Now, crit sometimes isn't that great with true damage, but I feel like in Soul Fighter it works pretty well because it helps out in the early parts of the fight. Sorry, it's flickering a little bit. So what I would do is similar crit builds. Infinity Edge, Strikers. Here I put the utility item Last Whisper. It just stacks with the critical strike chance to help those ults get a crit off. But of course, you can go for a third damage item. Some people put Mana Gen on Samira just to like try and like get her to a point where she's doing a bunch of casts and getting her things off. I don't think it's that important. I would personally recommend like a third damage item. I think it would be a little bit better. I've seen Krakens work pretty well on her because she does have a decent amount of attack speed in a lot of these situations. I've seen things like Deathblade also work well. Giant Slayer is more if you're like have like a lot of tanks that you have to chew through, can help out a little bit there. But here I just put like an extra crit item. Up to you. Something that could work if you're worried about your Samira dying a little bit, you can put a Hand of Justice. It gives her a little bit of extra Omnivamp, but I don't think it's necessary. Usually Samira isn't. I find that Samira doesn't really int. When she jumps in, she has enough Omnivamp that she's usually able to survive and come back safely. But if you're worried about her, or if people have heavy burst damage, you can give her Omnivamp or a survivability item. Gwen, stacking melee style crit items here. I think Jewel Gauntlet is great. The way Gwen works, similar to Samira, she gets multiple casts off and then she does like a Giga Nuke. Hers is like actually a Giga Nuke though, and it can like kill everybody pretty easily. So when you're working on Gwen items, I think some sort of mana gen is really essential. So you want to have at least one tier item. Here Hand of Justice works as a tier item, but you can also go for like other tier items like Void Staff, just to optimize damage in a meaningful way. But Jewel Gauntlet I think works really well. You can go full damage, like play more into the crit, like Jewel Gauntlet Strikers as well. There's lots of cool win conditions. There's also crazy situations like with Ornn artifacts, right? I think a lot of people probably saw the memes, like her scissors get massive if you give her range. So stuff like snipers along with her full board hit with the Rip the Threads is insane. So you can go like Giga Snipers on her and she can go like absolutely nuts. But sometimes she also dies if people have access to her, because she's pretty close to the front line. So survivability can also help quite a bit. So that's why I put like Edge of Night. Some survivability item could help her to live and get those casts off, which is pretty meaningful. Now, what do you do until you have a Gwen? Until you have a Gwen, it makes sense to play around the Samira and get some of her traits active. So Volibear works really nice. If you're in a spot where you hit an early Braum, you can easily just play around Luchador. This also fits in really nicely if you have a Soul Fighter +1, right? Because then you can drop one of the Soul Fighter units and then the board would fit something like this on level 9. So just keep that in mind. Luchador provides a free stun for everybody, and Volibear is actually a demon. So you can put a lot of the melee items that you would maybe have on a Gwen later on Volibear and kind of duel between the Volibear and the Samira. So that's just a great thing to do. If you don't have the Braum, then you know you can put in any other Luchador with the Volibear, or you can play towards like any Bastion or a Duelist if you're playing Viego. Viego 2 can also do a lot of damage. You can actually put a lot of the Gwen items on a Viego early in the game, and at that point, then you would play around the Duelist trait. And then once you have 8 Soul Fighter, you just play the 8 Soul Fighter, and a lot of times your level 9 board will look something like this. If you're not playing Luchador, if you don't have a +1, then you can play Yone. Yone is just a really strong unit that you can cap out around and then get your Edgelord activated. Finally, third board that we're going to talk about. Now, this board is a little bit harder to play in my opinion. It's not as straightforward of just click all the units that look like they share the same trait. This is a board that is a lot more complex. It has a little bit more moving parts, but I'll try and break it down to you guys in as easy a way as possible. But basically, at its crux, this is a 4 Mentor flex board. In specific, we're playing 4 Mentor with Mighty Mech. So Mighty Mech, what it does is it summons an extra frontline unit. It's basically like a giant Galio that just kind of exists and does a bunch of stuff. So that's the Galio here that gets summoned. Mentor is either a 1 or a 4 Mentor bonus. So you're either playing a 1 Mentor and then you get a team-wide bonus, or you're playing 4 Mentor and all the Mentor characters get upgraded abilities and all the bonuses, but the other allies gain nothing. So it's a very greedy thing. A lot of times you're basically just playing around these 4 units, the Kabuko, the Yasuo, the Udyr, and the Ryze. With this board, a lot of times you are playing around primary carry Ryze. So what you're doing is you're basically just playing Strategist and Executioner to support him, which you can get from many of the Mighty Mech units. Rise does an absolute insane amount of damage, and his mentor bonus basically allows him to gain some mana, so you don't really need to put mana generation on Rise. I would not, oops, I took away an item. I would not worry about making like a Shojin or a blue buff or an adaptive helm. Instead, just focus on as much damage as possible. Void Staff works really well. It's a utility item, but it gives really good stats, attack speed, and a lot of ability power, so it's just a really good item. It's been a good item for a while. Additionally, you can put Archangels. Look at the front line of this comp. You have frontline, you have frontline, you have frontline, you have so much frontline. It is insane how much frontline you have. Additionally, you have stun. It's insane. So Archangels works really well in this case because you can usually ramp up the Archangels to a point where then the Rise is just doing an insane amount of damage. So Archangels actually works really well with this comp because you have a lot of stuns, so the fight usually lasts long, and you have an insane amount of frontline, so the fight usually lasts long. So you can actually get really good value out of Archangels with this comp. Last item, I put Jewel Gauntlet. You can basically put any sort of damage amplification style item. Like Jewel Gauntlet for crit could work out. Strikers could also be good. It just gives good stats as well. But you already get some damage amp from Strategist, so I kind of like the Jewel Gauntlet if I'm going for max damage. You can go another Archangels as well. You can go a Strikers or a Giant Slayer. Basically, last item a little bit flexible, but I would recommend these two items if you can. Or you can just like drop the Archangel and go full crit, but then your damage isn't as optimized. I think the Archangel is pretty good in this situation. Next, frontline. Frontline, if you can, make a Protector's Vow. It's really good. It still gives starting mana. Jarvan has an insane stun. Jarvan will basically jump to a clump of enemies, so you always want to put Jarvan on a similar side as your opponent's carry, so that he goes whoop and he jumps in and he can sway the fight instantly. If he stuns the enemy carry, you can easily just win against any fight, even if your board is unupgraded and weaker. Protector's Vow helps him to cast earlier and also helps him to cast multiple times because it gives him some mana starting, and you can just make some mana items for Jarvan. So Protector's Vow, pretty good in this comp, usually prioritize it. If you're going for the high cap, eventually you will play a Yone. Yone will be really great with this comp. Obviously, Mighty Mech and gets the synergies from the other things. Your Yone items could be like, you know, anything really. He gets some Omnivamp already from the Edgelord trait, and he gets some AD from there, but he has good scaling on both stats because he does do both AP and AD damage, but most of his ult is in AD, so I would focus on AD items. You can go for stuff like survivability, things like a full like monster kind of tanky, drain tanky kind of build, even though he doesn't actually drain tank anymore. They changed the way units work right now, but something like a Titans can work out really well. It just gives a lot of mixed stats, which Yone can make great use of. You can also go for full crit as well, like a Hodge IE, but I wouldn't worry too much about prioritizing one particular build. This unit's gonna be hard to find and hard to hit a 2-star version. Make what you can and play as flexibly as possible. Now, the reason this comp is a little bit difficult is obviously this is a board that I'm showing you that is level 9. A lot of times if you don't have the Yone, you usually have to play like 4 Mighty Mech and like try and be a little bit flexible in your mid game. It might look something like this. A real treat or a real powerhouse of this comp is the fact that 4 Mentor is like its own little bubble that you can kind of have off to the side and then kind of play around your other units in whatever you can hit, whatever you can muster out. And that's where a lot of the skill comes in with this comp, and where it can be a little bit difficult, because if you're trying to hit the exact board, you might not hit. But if you're able to like understand which units you can flex in, that can help out a lot. Udyr also, I want to say, when he upgrades his ability, he also does anti-heal, so you don't have to worry about making anti-heal with this comp. So you don't have to make Morello. I would not waste components on Morello, Sunfire, or Red Buff, right? If you're playing around this comp, use those components for other damage items. What I was trying to say before with flexibility, right? When you're playing around when you're playing around this comp and trying to be flexible, there's many things you can do. Volibear can work really well as an extra unit. Just get Edgelord activated and can work as a good frontline and nuisance for a lot of boards. You can also play Luchador with it. Pretty easily fits in. Akali, I've also seen some people stabilize and play around Akali. The reason I'm pointing out these melee units is because obviously if you're making melee items that will eventually go on a Yone, you could put them on these units in the meanwhile to help you out a little bit in your mid game. And of course, you know, Braum, Lee Sin, Juggernaut, Duelist, you can activate any of the synergies. Could work out really well with a lot of these comps. On level 8, you do want to try and like hit your board and then like level, obviously, because hitting the Yone can be really high cap. You can also drop some of the Mighty Mechs for other 5-cost units of your choosing, because they will help you cap out really high. So obviously, like you know, eventually if you really need to, you can lose some of these units and cap out around more 5 costs on level 9 as well, which they're all really strong. It's all about being flexible enough and understanding what your item in your spot goes for, but at least for the purposes of this video, to make it a little bit easier, this is kind of like the standard, like simple way of playing it. Now, we talked about some 4-cost comps. We're going to start talking about some reroll comps. So one reroll that I think is particularly strong right now, and maybe is getting a little bit slept on, I'm not sure, is Katarina reroll. Katarina basically got buffed on the last day of PBE, and since then she has looked amazing. So it's hard to say exactly how strong she is because there's not enough practice on her, but typically you would play at least the way people are playing and what the stats kind of showed in PBE, which could be just fake. This might not be the optimal board, but it is looking absurdly strong. Basically, Katarina 3, Recon 3. I don't know how hard forceable this is. I don't know how broken it is, but it looks very broken. The idea is that Katarina just absolutely nukes everybody. She looks way overtuned, but I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm not forcing it every game. I don't expect you guys to. But because she gets Executioner activated, you can play around making crit items, but you don't have to make a JG on her. Obviously, with Executioner, her ult will crit anyways. So you want to stack up critical strike items or glove items, just because they're going to help in terms of making sure that she's always critting on those ults. So Hand of Justice, Omnivamp, damage, and then Strikers, damage amp, and critical strike chance. Good item pairing. And then usually a survivability item will work well because she jumps into the back line, something like an Edge of Night. That's typically what you're going to go for. You go for Katarina 3, then you can push for 7 Battle Academia. Now this comp also can work with a 2-star Katarina and you just play 7 Battle Academia. That's fine as well. I'm not sure if that's okay or how good it is. We're talking about this in terms of the reroll. I think as a level 8 comp, it's also pretty good, but I think it's a little bit less consistent because I feel like you really need to hit like Leona 2 if you're not playing the reroll variation. So it's a little bit less powerful as some of the other comps I was showing already. But then while you're rolling for Katarina, you can also roll for Recon. 7 Battle Academia gives them potential, which basically upgrades everybody. It basically makes like your whole board pretty substantially strong. And then with your Katarina, Yuumi, very strong unit right now. Does a lot of damage. It's just a little bit awkward to play boards that either sustain enough for the Yuumi, especially with a lot of people playing around 5 costs. Sometimes the Yuumi just gets exploded before she can do the damage that she needs to do. Or it's like, you know, if you have the sustain, then it doesn't work well. But here, Yuumi, don't worry about mana items because she's Prodigy. We have JG just to do like a lot of damage. She scales the longer the fight goes on. That's what I was saying. Like if you can balance having a lot of front line, she can work as a really good dual carry. And then here I'm just playing Rise for the Executioner because you're going to play like an extra Executioner. Until you hit 7 Battle Academia, you can play more Executioners in your mid game and just play around the Katarina until you hit everything. Next, we have the dedicated reroll trait for the set, which is Crew. The way Crew works is that every single time you 3-star a unit, you then work up this ladder of traits, like the trait web for the Crew. So this isn't based on how many Crew units you're playing. It's based on how many Crew units you 3-star. So when you 3-star one Crew unit, you now get 1 XP for reroll. And Crew unit odds don't change with player level. When you 2-star 2 of them, you get a free reroll. Basically, you want to get to the point where you're 3-starring all of them because the extra damage that you're getting from basically a spaceship shows up and does extra damage. The 3-star and 4-star buffs are huge damage spikes. So a lot of the 1 and 2-star buffs are to like set you up to hit everything, and then 3-star and 4-star you go really hardcore, and then 5-star that means that you hit that means you hit TF3. This is like a meme, you know. It's like if you hit 3-star legendary, it's like, okay, you know, it is what it is. But anyways, when you're playing around this comp, a lot of times you're 3-starring everybody. So at the start of a game, you're going to be playing mostly around Malphite. A Malphite 3-star is going to be really good for you. Malphite gains armor for each item equipped, so just throw all your items on the Malphite early. It's going to help you a lot into your late game. A lot of times you can also roll for Sivir. What I would recommend is getting at least one of these 2 units, because you want to activate this first crew bonus as early as possible. The XP per reroll is going to be pretty substantial in helping you to achieve your high cap, because you're going to want to spend a lot of gold on rerolling. This basically allows you to be able to push levels while you're rolling for everything else. So no matter what, stage 3, at the start of stage 3, you're sending it for at least one of these 2 3-star. You don't need both of them 3-star, because you'll hit the other one eventually over time, but you need at least one of them 3-star. Typically Malphite works out really well. When you're playing towards the high cap of this comp, you're going to be going for Shen 3 obviously, and Ziggs 3. You want all of them 3-starred. When you're rolling, depending on what you hit, if you haven't hit Malphite or Sivir yet, then you want to be rolling at low level. Once you hit one of them, I would recommend rolling closer to level 6, but you could just roll on level 5 a little bit. It really comes down to your item quality. Sivir is more of an AD unit, so you want to play like, you know, if you have AD items, you can play around the Sivir and cap out around the Sivir. If you have AP items, Ziggs is like an AP slash auto attacker, so attack speed works really well on this unit. Guinsoo and then Shiv, good utility as well as good stats, so it's just a really good item. Sorry, I say Shiv, Void Staff, you know what I mean. But Guinsoo, Void Staff seems really good, and then some sort of damage item after. I've also experimented with something like Nashers. The way Ziggs works is that his passive allows him to do like these, basically his passive is that all of his auto attacks are AP little bouncing balls. So you basically just want him to attack a bunch. You want him to have a bunch of attack speed. Because you're playing around Ziggs, and Ziggs is going to be your primary carry at one point, we actually just end up playing mostly strategists. Janna works really well because she activates Protector for the Malphite, so she's a great unit to play in your early game. And you could also go for a Janna 3 if you really want to, but I wouldn't recommend it because it wastes a little bit of gold. Then you just play all the strategists because Ziggs is going to be your high cap damage. If you're playing around Sivir, you could play Gnar. Gnar works out really well in certain cases if you don't hit everybody, or if you have some sort of emblem, you can then cap out around Braum and Gnar together. When you're playing later in the game, what I would recommend, however, is if you have a Malphite 3 and a Shen 3. Shen 3 is kind of like a demon. Even without Bastion in, I feel like he tanks more than Malphite. So I would recommend swapping items from Malphite to Shen whenever you get the chance. You don't have to play the sniper, by the way, for Sivir. You can play like this. Another Sivir tip, by the way, I really like to position Sivir like this. Sivir has an effect where she kind of throws her disc. It goes through the units and it returns. So you really want to set up a situation. Like what I would usually do is one single frontline unit, maybe units in a position like this. I'll try and do a full board so that I can show you what I'm trying to explain. Let me put some of these guys here, right? You really want to have like a situation where the Sivir is aiming to hit multiple units. You want them to kind of wrap around the unit, because that way when the Sivir hits a unit, she hits one unit and then it goes 2 hexes through the current target. So it'll hit this guy and it'll hit this guy, right? She'll shoot it and it'll go through both of them. You don't want to put your Sivir somewhere here. Like here could also work because she'll hit 2. But like, you know, in some cases, you know, if you put like a lot of units in the front line, you don't want to be in a situation like this where the Sivir is only hitting one unit, because you're losing a lot of damage, especially if your Sivir is itemized. The position that I found that works really well is something like this. You could also go for like the Ahri positioning in set, I think it was in set 11 or whatever, where you put the units like this and then she's always hitting 2 units this way. Either way, just make sure that she's hitting multiple units. That's just my tip. It will help you out a lot when playing around this trait. But yeah, just click the crew units. Easy. Next, I have Kayle reroll as the last reroll that I wanted to talk about. So Kayle is a 1-cost unit. She has a lot of cool special fruits that can actually help her out pretty well. Right now, one of the best vertical frontline traits is Juggernaut. So even though Kayle shares a synergy with heavyweight, a lot of times you would just play her with 6 Juggernaut. This could change in the future, but you basically just play 6 Juggernaut. She's a ramping attack speed user that scales with level as well. So her passive is that she does extra AP damage. On level 6, she does shred, so you don't need to worry about making shred items. And then on level 9, she becomes an absolute monster. So a lot of this comp is playing it from a really good spot. If you have a lot of early copies of Kayle, or if you have worth the wait Kayle or something like that, you basically just play around this Kayle, make a Guinsoo. You need some attack speed on her, obviously, and then crit works really nicely. I don't know why you would think that she wants more attack speed, but I think since they changed the Guinsoo effect, you just want to have one Guinsoo and it's good enough. She works really well with crit, so Jewel Gauntlet and Striker's Flail. It seems pretty easy to remember. A lot of the builds that I'm showing are very similar, so you know, can't go wrong here. I think in the stats in PvE, this was like one of the better builds. You could go for Zach 3. I wouldn't worry about it. I don't even think you have to reroll a frontline unit because you don't want to waste too much gold unless you're like stuck at a low level looking for the Kale. You just want to hit the Kale, start pushing levels, call it a day. A similar build that you can go for with a different unit is Smolder. Smolder reroll is a reroll on level 7, however, not a 1-cost reroll. Here it's a Lulu. Lulu turns into Smolder. You use the Smolder. Smolder, you want mana gen and then AD crit items. So like IE and Striker's Flail, because he gains infinite AD like as he levels up with his monster trainer. But this is another similar Juggernaut build. If you're trying to figure out what you want to play from Juggernauts, you can play like a Juggernaut into one of these 2 lines and you'll be relatively strong. Anyways, those are the comps that I want to talk about right now. I tried to introduce some of the concepts. One thing I did want to talk about are fruits. Set 15, I'm going to make a guide separate like on fruits in general, and we're going to talk about that later. But before we do that, I just wanted to give you a little introduction, right? There's these things, you put the fruit on the unit in set 15 and it gives them some extra bonus effect. You can see that there's lots and lots and lots of power-ups that help out your unit. What I would recommend in all of these comps, I was talking about who the main carries and the main tanks are. You get 2 fruits, put 1 on your tank, 1 on your main carry. General advice. And then when you're looking to pick one of these, don't worry too much about broken interactions. Think more about how I kind of talk on my channel about items. Think of it like another item, right? When I talk about diminishing returns, right? I have a couple guides. Diminish, right? Diminishing returns. I'm going to make a new one for set 15. Think of it like that. Whatever your units have, try and augment that by giving them some extra damage in a different way. So for example, if your unit has a bunch of attacks, if your unit has a bunch of stats and you need attack speed, give them something that gives them attack speed because they need attack speed. If you are lacking damage amp, give damage amp, right? Like, look at what the unit has and then add what they're missing. And that will give you a lot of value. That's what I would say, right? If you're looking at a tank, right? If you have a lot of armor, give them max HP. If they have a lot of max HP, give them armor, right? Give them something to scale up their other stats to make the most out of all the stats that they can have. That's the best advice I can give. So when you're picking one of these, right, try and fill in the gaps, right? If your unit has a lot of Omnifam, this is going to be inherently worse than if you just gave them something else. Now, some that are really good in general that I'll just say, if you want like a catch-all, can't go wrong, Unstoppable, pretty good. You get health, which is pretty good on most units, and then they also stun every time they charge to new targets, and they're immune to CC. So this is a pretty good tank anomaly. So if you're looking for a tank anomaly, this is one that you can't go wrong with. Another one that's really good on a lot of units is Bullet Hell. The units that get it offered are only these ones, so it's not as many, but Bullet Hell could work really well because it's 35% more projectiles with abilities. It rounds up as well, so if you're playing any of these units, Bullet Hell is going to be great because it's basically like a 35% damage increase. That's a large increase comparatively to a lot of these. So those ones are pretty good. And then of course, like I said, just try and like figure out, like, you know, for example, this one, gain crit chance, right? If your unit already has a crit build going and you have crit chance, this might help. If you don't need the crit strike chance or you don't have an ult that crits, this might be a little bit less impactful, right? Stuff like that. But anyways, hopefully that helps out a little bit. I'm not going to go into like what the best things are because nobody really knows. That's just the advice. That's how I'm picking them. Diminishing returns policy. Those were the comps. Hopefully this helped you out a little bit. We're going to do a full set 15 guide on like the roles and all of the other stuff. I'm gonna be doing that one by one every day because like I'm not gonna do it all at once because I have to do daily videos anyways. So this was just the intro. Like I said, some of this might change. Items might get optimized, boards might get optimized. I will repeat the top 3 comps video next week. So I'll do another one next week. So don't worry, there'll be one like Monday or Tuesday. And we'll update it with whatever ends up being figured out. Or if it's the same comps, I'll just say the same comps again, and I'll talk about them a little bit more. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this was helpful. Have a great day. Happy climbing. See ya. Bye-bye.